Well, as the coach said, football is not just in the air, but since we're all here because we love this game, I thought I'd start out by giving you coaches an opportunity just to sit back for a minute and watch some of the reason why we're all here today. Now the sound should be on here. I love this game. I am the mother, the wife, and the daughter of football players. I also am the mother of a daughter who plays soccer, tennis, badminton, and swims. And I think sports, as you all know, is one of the most important ways we can influence young people. So as a neurosurgeon and a mother of a football player, I am here to represent why we need to keep this game as a wonderful thing for our sons and daughters to be involved in, but of course we want to keep it safe for them. We love the game and we love our children. What I'd like to share with you today is the first time ever shown in public, the slide set that America's neurosurgeons will be presenting to any group that wants to hear about concussions in sports, any community group, any sports group. Call your local Think First organization or one of the 3,000 practicing neurosurgeons in the United States, in fact in North America, because this slide set will be available to them so that we can answer some of the community's questions about sports. And these are the things that are the most often asked questions about this epidemic, so-called epidemic that we've seen in the last year or so. And over the next just few minutes, I'd like to go over these questions and some of the appropriate scientifically based answers to them. So first of all, we want to, as parents, coaches, teammates, and players, know what is a concussion. Now the first thing there is the medical and scientific definition, but it's enough to say it's now defined as any change in neurologic function. So, and we'll go over that in some detail. It's often referred to as mild traumatic brain injury, and this is a big difference. Only about 10% of concussions involve loss of consciousness. So, yes, you can have a concussion without losing consciousness. In fact, that's most often the case. And a concussion is just the result of a forceful motion of the head causing a brief change in mental status. Now, this is a very useful poster. At the very last slide I have will show the websites where you can download it. But this poster that describes a concussion, its symptoms and signs, is developed by America's neurosurgeons, the NFL, and the CDC in conjunction with USA Football, so that you can read it. These are the symptoms that you need to know about, and there are wallet cards available at check-in that you can take and distribute to your coaching team and to your parents. It's confusion, headache, difficulty remembering or paying attention, balance problems, dizziness, feeling sluggish, hazy, foggy, feeling irritable. Sometimes it's not bad attitude in puberty, it's a concussion, nausea or vomiting, being bothered by light or noise, double vision, blurry vision, slowed reaction time, sleep problems, and of course loss of consciousness. But what we may all have learned is, the first question, did you get knocked out? That is not nearly as important. You got knocked out, for sure you had a concussion, but 9 times out of 10 with concussion, you won't have gotten knocked out. These are the things that you as a coach or a parent might observe. Do they look dazed or stunned? Are they confused? Are they forgetting their instructions when they don't normally? They're unsure of what was going on in the game before they were hit. They're moving clumsily. Are they answering questions just too slowly? The loss of consciousness we mentioned. The personality changes. They can't recall events prior to or after a hit or fall. Those are all the signs of concussion. You want to be sure you know them, your coaching staff knows them, and the team, every one of your players, knows them and knows to report them. Well, the next question, all of you know this, I don't have to tell you, you couldn't open a newspaper, certainly not a sports page in the 2010 football season without reading about concussion, right? It seemed to be everywhere. Well, part of it is because of this evolving definition of a concussion, that is any change in neurologic function and not limited to getting knocked out or getting a stinger in the case of the spinal cord. Well, it turns out that concussion is very common in sports, particularly in youth sports, and it's increasing. So the need to be able to identify it, report it, and treat it appropriately is even more important now than it was 10 years ago. There is this potential for the well-publicized catastrophic outcomes that you all have been reading about. And finally, there's been the recent development of tools, both psychological testing and hopefully in the not too distant future, even biologic markers that will help us make the sport even safer by an ever increasingly precise identification of when a concussion has occurred. Well, there's this evolving definition of concussion. If you remember nothing else, I want you to remember you don't have to be knocked out to be concussed. Why this increased focus on it? Why are we reading about it all the time? Well, there's just more people playing sports of all kinds in the U.S. As years go on. This is all sports and recreation. Concussions are the #1 reason why people are seen in the emergency rooms of the United States these days. There's somewhere between 1.5 and so many as nearly 4 million concussions that present to America's ERs every year. It's common in youth sports. Look at this number, 58%, so close to 60% of kids who present to emergency rooms are there because they have or think they have had a sports-related concussion. And you are the people who are going to be seeing this and advising your team, your assistant coaches, your trainers, and your parents. And concussions appear to be increasing, especially in high school athletes. That's what the data shows. It goes along with what you've heard about the increasing athletic prowess of our players and also the equipment where our players feel invincible because they are so protected by their equipment. The recent media reports, and there will be more this year, I'm sure, unfortunately, that highlight the potential for catastrophic injury. And then finally, legislative efforts. And Jeff mentioned that Governor Quinn signed into law just this week a law in Illinois that is essentially a Lystet law. If you don't know who Zach Lystet was, I'll share with you. He was a 13-year-old in Washington State who was a youth football player, coached by his own father, very good player. He was concussed in a game. He did come out of the game. Both he and his dad thought he was okay to go back in. It was just lightning striking twice. He got a second concussion, and he will never be the same. He was in coma for a year, and he and his experience and his family's experience were behind the Lystet law, first to pass in Washington State, and now in several other states around the country, now including Illinois. And there's a big legislative effort to, state by state across the country, be sure that there are rules in place. It's not just team rules or league rules, it's now law that anyone who's had a concussion or a suspected concussion may not return to play until they've been cleared for return to play by a health professional who is expert in sports concussion. So remember now, it's no longer just your team rule, the league rule, it's now the law in Illinois. And finally, the other reason why there's increased focus is because of the development of tools. And here you see an athlete who's doing their impact testing. You may know impact, developed by neurosurgeon Joe Maroon, longtime team physician for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and many of your high schools will have this in place. Every team in the NFL, every team in the NCAA uses it, as well as multiple other sports, Major League Baseball, Major League Hockey, World Wrestling, etc. And it is baseline testing of the psychological profile of players so that it can then be compared after a possible concussive event. And it helps us, it's just one of the tools we use to help determine whether it's safe for that athlete to return to play. So I don't need to tell you that youth sports are inspired by what is going on in collegiate play. We're here at the home of the Wildcats because of that. They're also inspired by the NFL. So last year the NFL had some important new changes or new guidelines in their concussion policy. And chief among them is that a player in the NFL cannot be returned to play until he has been cleared not only by the team physician, but most importantly, by a physician who is not on the payroll of the team or the league, an independent physician. And it would be wise to follow suit at the youth sports level as well. And then there are additional directives in terms of the advisability of use of the neuropsychologic testing we just talked about, the emphasis on proper wearing of the equipment, especially helmets. There are other rules about spearing, which you know about, and there has been $1 million put into the ongoing study of the long-term effects of traumatic encephalopathy, which is caused by, we think, by this sport. So how can you, as coaches, and some of you are all coaches and parents, how can we help minimize the factors that cause the risk of concussion in the young people that we coach and the children that we love? We have to teach safe techniques, particularly the no spearing rule in both practice and in play. And we need, and I'm sure Joe will talk about this, we need to change the culture about reporting concussion symptoms in oneself and one's teammates. That's a very important aspect about why we're here today. Be aware that injuries are more common in our young players than they are in the older players, and certainly than they are in the NFL. Use some of the available assessment tools, and I'll show some examples of them quickly in a moment. Monitor what's going on at the highest levels of play at the NFL, and as we see new NFL directives, as this issue of sports concussion is being studied, in large part aided by the neurosurgeons who are on the NFL advisory boards, follow what's going on and try to adapt it insofar as you can to make the play safer for your athletes. And finally, there are head and spine injury prevention programs. I want to share with you about that. So greater emphasis on the heads-up blocking, which we've already heard about. You can download these NFL locker room posters from cdc.org and be extra vigilant with your young players. If they won't report it, you need to recognize it. So here are some tools, and again, as I said, I'll show you how to find these at the end of my talk in just a few minutes. But the CDC, in conjunction with America's neurosurgeons and the professional sports leagues, has put things on downloadable websites, which is cdc.gov, youth sports concussion, in football, in baseball, and in lacrosse. And what is organized neurosurgery doing? I mentioned at the beginning that this whole slide set is what's available to every neurosurgeon you know, and every community should have a local neurosurgeon. Well, we're really committed to this aspect of what we do. Yes, we're responsible for treating injuries, but we can have so much more impact if we prevent those injuries. So what we've done this year, and here's just an example of one event we had. We rented Invesco Field in Denver. We had a helmet giveaway to the underprivileged youth, measuring them, teaching them how to use it, why to use it. Think First, which I'll tell you about in a minute, is our head and spine injury prevention program. And then we had a celebrity prevention advocate, and here you can see Tim Tebow, a